welcome everyone. Welcome to our event. My name is Molly. I'll be chairing today's event. This is our roundtable discussion on equality in education. Just a little bit about Show Race and Red Card if you're not overly familiar, if it's the first time you're kind of coming to us, or if you're a long-standing supporter, this is going to sound overly boring, but not too much. Show Race and Red Card is the UK's leading anti-racist educational charity. We were established in 1996 in January, thanks to in part a donation by the then Newcastle United goalkeeper Shaka Hislop, president of the charity. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome and introduce our guest speakers who we'll be hearing from today. Firstly, from Shaka Hislop, Show Race and Red Card president, Daniel Kabidi, NEU president, Asif Chishti, Education Institute of Scotland, who is on the anti-racism subcommittee, Maria Pentniger Wallace, Show Race and Red Card education worker, Kate Mills, Show Race and Red Card senior education worker, Jed, the CEO of Show Race and Red Card, and Simon Richards, the eCoach director. We've also had apologies from Kevin Courtney, the NEU Joint General Secretary, Leroy Rossignol, football coach, pundit and vice president of Show Race and Red Card, and Christine Blower, also the vice president of Show Race and Red Card. So we'll be hearing from all these wonderful people throughout today's event. Ultimately, we aim for the guests to leave the event feeling more empowered, more knowledgeable, to challenge issues of racism within their school or workplace, as well as learning a little bit more about what we do at Show Races and the Red Card and how we can help you in this journey. We also ask that guests in attendance add any questions to the panel to the comment section or the chat box throughout the event, and we'll pick these up at the end to feature some of them in our question and answer. And just a few notes for the speakers. Please do put your hand up if I haven't brought you in, or if you want to add a point to something. If you're kind of going over time, I will message you directly, or if you don't read my message, I will interrupt you in the kind of interest of time and keep it on schedule. So firstly, just I guess to set the scene for our work and set the event up, earlier this year, Show Race and the Red Card released a snapshot of an ongoing consultation with over 700 educators from councils across Scotland. And the findings showed the worrying scale of racism within schools, including almost half, 48% of teachers were aware of a pupil or pupils expressing negative attitudes relating to skin colour. 85% of educators said tailored anti-racism education training would be beneficial to pupils themselves and colleagues, and 93% of educators said anti-racism must be included within the curriculum. So that really does show the need for our work, which is something that we'll be talking about throughout today's event. And these issues have in some parts been exacerbated by school staff pressures, and the inability to address them made all the more likely as a result of financial cuts since and during austerity measures, curriculum changes with little support or training or consultation, additional expectations and pressures regarding planning, meeting targets, measuring outcomes, and on top of that, managing COVID restrictions and guidance. We've also, I think, is this when you'd like me to bring in the poll, Simon? Is this the poll time? We have a poll.
We do have a poll. Well, we can launch it. This is just about whether people have had equality training before. And I think this means full stop, not just with Show Races and the Red Card, but any kind of equality training. A decent amount, not sort of 20 minutes during a lunch break or something like that, but a fairly good course. Do you want me to launch that? And you've got about 30 seconds to answer this. It's a simple yes or no question. So you should all see that on the screen now, so you should be able to interact with it. And then I'll give you a warning when I'm closing the poll, and we can have a look at the results. There we go. I think we're pretty much there or thereabouts. So if I end that poll now, you should be able to see the results. Can you see that? So 81% said yes and 90% no.
Okay, thanks, Simon. I'm going to bring Daniel in on this to elaborate more on these matters for teachers and speak a little bit more on the pressures as well. So Daniel, please do come in.
Hi, thanks, Molly. So you just wanted me to answer specifically in regards to this, Molly, or more generally?
Can you discuss, I've just mentioned some of the pressures.
Yeah.
that are on school staff, and how as well these pressures can therefore exacerbate some of the difficulties that we're seeing in schools around tackling racism?
I mean, the real issue around education, and particularly in schools, and I'm sure many of you who are educators are well aware of, is there's just very little space for teachers to and wider educators to become more knowledgeable around the issues around race and racism. CPD can be fairly narrow, but generally there's a culture in school that is driven towards meeting data targets, progress around English and maths, and that essentially means that the curriculum's quite narrow, but the space to have these really difficult conversations around race and racism is being made much smaller. What often will happen is if there is racist incidents, young people will be reprimanded in some way, but often that's not really enough. There needs to be a deep and thorough dialogic investigation into why young people come to those sorts of views and opinions, and to why they're wrong, and to have that discussion around how we shift. In fact, that's why I really do value Show Racism Red Card when I've had them come into my classroom and into my schools, because those conversations do happen, but that is the real issue around this. And obviously there's also a culture within education that's driven from sort of Parliament around curriculum that doesn't lend itself to necessarily celebrating the global majority, global communities around the world, and means that, you know, there's perhaps a bit of a narrow island narrative that our young people become familiar with, rather than something much more broader.
Thanks, Daniel. Just something that's popping into my head, and something we'll explore, I guess, throughout today's event is so you've spoken about kind of something coming from Parliament. You've also spoken about the general culture in schools, as well as this idea of reprimanding students without that education. What do you see really as the almost the solution to these issues? How do we challenge this?
So all of it, everything, it's really comes from the top down. The accountability regime that schools live under force that culture of that sort of narrow culture where race and racism isn't really discussed, and where young people can get a thorough understanding. But there are, of course, educators and schools have agency, so there are things that can be done. So, we have an anti-racist charter, the NEU. We launched it just after the murder of George Floyd, actually. It's endorsed by Lewis Hamilton, but it's really about giving educators the tools to create that space within education more broadly, to have those sort of conversations and change culture. So it's also about, creating an anti-racist curriculum where, you don't have just a Black History Month, but Black people are celebrated all year round, Black achievements celebrated, and Black culture. And that's really important because, we have to live in the real world, really, and often the culture doesn't lend itself to that.
Fantastic, thanks, Daniel. Really interesting, and I'm sure we'll have more time to think about solutions as well as we go on. And I guess in spite of these barriers, just like Daniel was saying, we need to find solutions, I guess, to overcome them, because there's evidently those stats and what I read out before clearly demonstrate a need for our work, both for pupils and teachers. But we're also fighting some historical and contemporary forces as well, which have seen obviously racism embedded in our society. And I could talk about these forever and a day. We can talk about the slave trade and colonialism, which laid the foundations for racism in modern Britain. We can think about more recent events, which have kind of rehashed historical narratives. We can think about Brexit, reactions to terrorist incidents, as well as the correlation between xenophobia and scapegoating and austerity. I'm going to come to Shaka and then Asif on this one. If you could just talk a little bit more, I guess, about why there is a need for this work, but also why these forces particularly are so difficult for us to fight against. And if you want to elaborate on any more of these forces, please do be my guest.
Hi, certainly. Thanks, Molly. I think it's important that we deal with a lot of the issues, and particularly historical issues, in an honest manner. I feel that our failure to appreciate the past and the experiences of people of color, and how slavery and colonialism have impacted those communities and continues to impact those communities. Our failure to deal with them in an honest and open manner has left a space for conspiracy theories, which I think only lean further into upholding of white supremacy. For instance, we've had to do a lot of introspection over the last couple of years, especially early on in the lockdown. I'm sure we all saw it on social media where people were likening the wearing of masks and lockdowns to slavery and to the experience of Jews in concentration camps. I really don't understand how people make that jump. How people assume that wearing a mask is somehow akin to what Black people experienced for hundreds of years. Even recently, over here in the States, is a comedian by the name of Chelsea Handler, who went to one of the southern states, I believe Mississippi, to speak to people there about their own understanding of slavery and Confederacy here in the US. And largely, their opinions were that the media blew the experience of slaves and their maltreatment out of all proportion. That there may have been a handful of slave owners who mistreated their slaves, pushed them around, slapped them around a bit, but anything more than that was the media kind of taking a false narrative, in an effort to paint these people from Mississippi as racist. And I simply don't understand what's the benefit to that deliberate repurposing of history, of that denying of history or the experience of Black people, and why their communities were held back in that way. I've often said, and I think this is a perfect forum for it, I take every opportunity I can to boast of having 2 university degrees, but I feel that my greatest education came within a dressing room, of sharing the same space with people from all 4 corners of the earth, understanding their cultures, what shaped them, getting to know them as people, and recognizing, despite our differences, be they ethnic or language, how much we had similarly, how much we shared. And I felt that was vital to me in my own growth as a person and as a member of not just a football team, but a community. We have to be honest about our past if we are to better shape the future that we all envision.
Thanks, Shaka. Asif, I'm going to come to you. Maria, I saw a hand up, so I'll come to you after.
Okay, thank you for having me along, and thanks for the opportunity to give a perspective from Scotland and the perspective of the EIS, Scotland's biggest teaching union. I suppose one thing I would want to stress is really the time has come now for us to re-examine our curriculum. Is our curriculum fit for purpose in promoting anti-racism? Partly as a response to the Black Lives Matter movement, the government in Scotland started a working group called the Race Equality and Anti-Racism in Education programme. And the EIS has been instrumental in sitting on that body and contributing and making the voices of teachers known. I myself sit on the curriculum subgroup of that working group, and I thought it might be useful for me to give you a flavour of the type of things that we are pushing for north of the border. So one of the key aspects for us is that we think in the curriculum that anti-racism needs to be tackled head on. It's got to be done in and of itself. It's got to be discrete anti-racism anti-racist education, not education that comes under a different umbrella, under the umbrella of inclusion, for example, because when you have a difficulty, when you have an issue or a problem in society, you have to tackle it head on, and that starts by naming the problem straight away. We've got to have a curriculum which deals with these issues but does not inadvertently reinforce negative stereotypes about race. So there have to be issues explored such as immigration, and yes, we do need to have a curriculum that addresses our role in the transatlantic slave trade and in the links between the slave trade and modern day racism. But it has to be a curriculum that goes well beyond that as well. There has to be consistent, sharp focus across the curriculum, not anti-racism education that's stuck in a corner somewhere, but across all stages and across all curricular areas. It's got to be a truly decolonized curriculum that reflects the nature of the diverse society we have in education now. And I suppose to sum up, what we want is a curriculum that allows young people to talk about race, to feel comfortable talking about race, that they're race literate, because you can't tackle racism unless you talk about race.
Thanks so much, Asif. And yeah, I know the word curriculum is on everyone's minds, and it's something that we naturally gravitate towards if we want to interject more of this, obviously, into our education system. I know there's been some comments about Wales in the chat, and I know, Kate, you can definitely speak on that and the work that's happening in Wales. Maria, do you want to come in, or is the hand gone down for a reason?
Actually, I think if Kate responds to the work that's happening in Wales, that would be great, and then I can come in after that, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course. Kate, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what's been happening in Wales with the curriculum changes?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something we're really, really excited about, actually. It's Welsh Government commissioned a working group to look into anti-racism education in Wales, chaired by Professor Charlotte Williams, and they released a report last year. I think it was January, February time now. That included 51 recommendations for embedding anti-racism across the sector of education. So it looked at all levels. It looked at school level, it looked at university, it looked at teacher training, and it came up with these recommendations. The government's accepted them in full. It's put £500,000 initially towards funding that and embedding that for the first kind of to start it off. And we're going to see where we go from there. But the kind of recommendations that it's looking at for schools are things like staff having deep, ongoing anti-racism conversations, talking about race, talking about racism, having ongoing training. It also, we have a whole new curriculum as well coming into place, and it's been slightly delayed and it's got a staggered start, but it's got areas of learning and experience, but for purposes, and the ones that would be relevant to anti-racism in particular is that it's looking at creating ethical informed citizens, and that's a core part of everything we do in education, that children are ethical informed citizens and healthy confident individuals. So for us, we're really proud that some of our research in Wales actually fed into the Charlotte Williams report and was referenced within that. So we felt that that influence there was really, really exciting. But it means that we've got something to work with, we've got something to lobby for as well, and we've got something to show teachers, look, there is space, this is in the curriculum, this is important, this matters. And hopefully we can move forward together now in embedding anti-racism. The other thing is they've done reviews around looking at things like the statues in Wales and talking about putting information plaques, and I know that's a whole discussion for another time, but it's exciting. And so hopefully now we're preparing our resources, and I noticed some comments about perhaps working with the Black curriculum. We're really excited to be part of a project in Wales called DARPL, which, please don't ask me what it stands for off the top of my head, but it's a collaboration of lots of anti-racism organisations and individuals coming together to roll out this new curriculum, and we're working with Black curriculum in partnership there as well. So the partnership working is really exciting also.
Thanks for that, Kate. And I guess another question before we move on is, and ask if you can speak to this maybe in Scotland, and maybe Daniel, you in England. Where are we with this in England and Scotland? Are we learning from Wales? How likely are we to see similar steps taken in England and in Scotland? So I'll come to you first, and then you, Asif.
Well, you know, we've had a government that I would think, in Parliament in Westminster, that has not viewed this as a priority in terms of anti-racism within education and within the curriculum more broadly. So those of us teaching in England perhaps don't have so much, or didn't have so much to look forward to in terms of something coming from government. Michael Gove's 2014 curriculum actively whitewashed it, in my opinion. It actively removed any sort of narratives, particularly around history and so on, or space where Black people were celebrated. Of course, you know, it looks pretty turbulent politically, so, you know, the priorities of government may change. But I think the important thing for educators and teachers to recognise is that there is space to do some of this stuff yourselves. To, you know, I've got a friend who's a maths teacher, and I talked to him about embedding anti-racism in maths, and he was like, yeah, absolutely. Before we do algebra now, we learn about its Arabic roots. So much of the curriculum can be impacted, and it can have anti-racism in it. I mean, it's very simple things that you can do as teachers or at schools. It's just about making sure that the literature that you've got available to children to read is diverse, and you know, it's not difficult things that can really create a huge change. So, you know, I think that we really need to make progress from the bottom up in England, and drive that change and demand and raise the demand for an anti-racist curriculum, because it's what we're doing to many children, or what the current trajectory in England does, essentially lies to children on an industrial scale. You know, Colston was all fairly fresh in our minds, isn't it, after the trial last week and so on. But, you know, I never learnt about Colston in school. I never learnt how he enslaved 90,000 Africans, and I never learnt how 19,000 died in the crossing. I never realised he enslaved men, women and children, and he was the deputy governor of the Royal Africa Company, and the men, women and children were branded with RAC across their chest. I mean, every child should learn this. You know, these sorts of slave traders and so on are immortalized in statues, in street names, and so on. But of course, you know, whilst the government aren't enforcing that teachers educate about this, you know, teachers can still educate about these sorts of things where they find the space, because they have agency to do so. So it's really important that we develop that mood on the bottom, which has developed. You know, I think we've trained up anti-racist charter 5,000 teachers or something like that. It's quite a significant number. That's 5,000 teachers, 5,000 different 5,000 teachers. Not all of it, I doubt it'll be 5,000 schools, but you know, there is a real desire amongst educators and teachers to teach the truth on British history, to teach the truth on Britain's colonial past, and to also make the school environment more representative of the communities they serve.
Thanks, Daniel. That was the answer that I expected regarding our political situation at the moment in England. Asif, do you want to talk a little bit about the Scottish context?
Yeah, so I would say we're starting from a different starting point. That's one important point I would make. We don't have a national curriculum, capital N, capital C in Scotland. We never have. We have a curriculum for excellence. And in the curriculum for excellence, there's huge flexibility for teachers to do whatever they like with the curriculum. And of course, that's a fantastic opportunity, and it's very welcome in many ways. But it also means that sometimes these issues get lost, or they get subsumed into bigger and wider umbrella issues. So that's an important point to note from north of the border. I would say that in Scotland, in the education area, that there is the will to change now, as Bell Hook would call it. Education Scotland recently have been doing a lot of professional development courses for teachers, particularly aimed at racial literacy amongst teachers, which is obviously really important. And they've also recently published a range of materials for teachers to use for anti-racist education. Another thing I would highlight is that now, to become a head teacher in Scotland, you have to do something called the Standard for Headship, and anti-racism issues are a key component of that. And I can say that in the past 2 or 3 years, as an equality rep for my union, I've had more teachers come to me and talk to me about anti-racism than I've ever had. And a lot of those teachers have been deputy head teachers who are aspiring to become head teachers. And that's a really good way in for us, I think. If we can bring that cohort with us, then things are looking good. One aspect I would say about a curriculum, of course, it's very exam driven. Like I'm sure my colleagues in England and Wales would agree with that. In the history curriculum in Scotland, for example, there's a unit on the slave trade, which National 5 candidates for history have to study. And in the guidance for that, it's suggested that they're looking to the slave links of Liverpool and Bristol. Doesn't mention Glasgow in Scotland, but it does mention 2 cities in England. And that's one thing that we're looking for to change, is why would we overlook an example that's on our own doorstep that we could use as a perfect way in to talking about these issues?
Yeah.
Definitely, thanks, Asif. And it's good to hear you're having those promising conversations with aspiring heads. That's really promising to hear. And as well as these kind of larger forces, socio-political forces, we can also talk about technology, and we can also talk about social media and traditional print media as well. Much of the kind of true scale and operation, particularly of social media and technology, is unknown. It's kind of uncharted territory with a lot of this. We can think about chat forums, we can think about bots, we can think about encrypted messages, and again, as the news is constantly adapting to this and constantly utilizing technology to peddle difficult narratives and rhetoric to challenge. So, and we've seen how, I guess, social media can also harbour an obscene amount of racism, and this kind of came to a head, I guess, in most recent memory in following the Euros and the racism that some of our Black England players experienced during and after the Euros. So Shaka, I'd like to come to you on anything that we've discussed, but particularly that last point. And Kate and Maria, I'd also love to come to you as some of our educators who are on the ground working with young people at the moment.
Certainly, yeah. As you mentioned, Molly, post Euros, you saw the reaction of a number of England fans towards the 3 Black players who missed penalties. You saw the fallout within the stadium. You saw the fallout on social media as well. One of the things that kind of struck me from that is the differences in the experiences of people, largely along racial lines as to what they thought. And I remember speaking to someone who was at one of the watch events for the Euro final, and immediately after the 3rd penalty was missed, there was a Black member of the group who got up and excused himself, said, "Listen, I'm heading home now," and this white fan, it did not dawn on him, and I think I speak for most, if not all, Black football fans in recognizing that moment, what it meant. It kind of represented the fragility of how we are received in not just English or British, but many Western societies. That when we are successful, when we champion a cause or whatever that may be, we're celebrated. But it's a very fragile relationship in that we aren't allowed to be otherwise human. And the reaction to that is as vitriolic as you saw, and that has been our experiences a lot. And we are talking about 2021. That's still such a situation for so many of us in our own societies.
Thanks, Shaka. I wrote down the fragility of how we are received, because I find that really powerful and articulates that kind of, particularly that happens with athletes, I think, and singers and songwriters, that they're seen as these incredible people who have these amazing talents. They do really well for our country, but then that fragility is so stark when we think about, you know, what happened during and after the Euros. Kate, Maria, I'll come to you, and then Kate, I'll come to you, just to talk a little bit about the new forces that we're seeing for young people, and how we as educators can deal with this, how young people can navigate this. It's going to be a difficult one, but what do you think? Maria, I'll come to you first.
I think there's a quote that really stays with me, and it's from Professor Keanu, where he speaks about the fact that racism is a structure, not an event. So often we hear about examples of racism, and those are the examples and the incidences that teachers are more readily responsive to in some cases, where a particular slur is said. And so there's a policy in which can be referred to and applied to in reference to that. However, as has been mentioned so far, we know that racism is inherently structural, and so it needs to be responded to at that level. And that's what we're not seeing in a lot of the cases in England. And luckily, the Red Card is working with the NEU and other partners in relation to what we can do. And it's so reassuring and encouraging, the fact that although it's not being looked at a structural level from government, teachers are still coming to us in abundance and asking for support and more tools and more resources and how they can respond to this, which is absolutely wonderful. In relation to this racism as a structure, we really need to understand the socialization. So yes, it's happening at structural level, media, education. For young people, a lot of influence is also coming from not from the newspapers. Sometimes we don't even read newspapers anymore. And YouTubers. So I was really shocked to hear a gamer on YouTube talk about the fact that it's okay to say the N-word because we hear it in rap. And so everybody should be allowed to say the N-word. You know, we're hearing this example from influencers of young people, which is particularly worrying. And whilst representation is increasing in media, it's absolutely fantastic. George Floyd had to die for it to happen. We're still seeing intersectionality isn't represented, and still colorism. So for example, I watched 2 fantastic dramas in the BBC, all of the Black women were light skinned. So we still see colorism, and this impacts on how our young people perceive themselves, their self-esteem, their beauty. So there has been progress, but still more needs to be made.
Thanks, Maria. Again, really powerful. And you would have seen that I also wrote down racism as structure, not event. I obviously got my pen out and wrote that in my notebook. Kate, I'm going to come to you as well. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I wrote down structure, not an event as well. I've not heard that. I probably echo. I guess it.
Kate, you're breaking up a little bit. We can't quite hear you properly.
Sorry. I'll turn my video off and see if that helps. Is that helping?
Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant. So I really just echo Maria. I think in terms of going to workshops and working with young people, YouTube and game websites are the number one thing that when I say to them, does racism exist? That's coming up. In terms of, it's interesting though how when they talk about racism, and they can talk about racism being wrong, linking that in the abstract to their own experience, their own practice, sometimes that link isn't there. So it's how we show them that that's that can be reflective, and how that needs to impact their actions as well, I think is really, really interesting and important. Just from a Welsh perspective as well, the time and time again, the England football final comes up, so it's not a specific regional thing. That's something that seems to have been really, really impactful across the board. So yeah, really finish there. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Fantastic. And that I also see that as well, the link between seeing something happen on a game, seeing something happen online, and not understanding how that can be replicated in your actual own life that you live in reality. I also feel there are so many trends that I always hear about that are happening on TikTok and other social media sites, that's why I said it's uncharted territory, and I'm a young person who use social media. So a whole nother force that we're going to have to contend with in how we respond to racism with young people and in schools. So at the beginning of the event, I mentioned that despite all these challenges and pressures, Show Racism Red Card can offer a helping hand. And we've already kind of slightly candidly mentioned some of this already. So Kate and Maria, again, I'm going to come to you two. Can you talk about the work that we do within the classroom setting at schools, and why you feel it's important? Kate.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start us off. So just kind of some points about what we do. Obviously, we go into classrooms, we work with children from foundation phase all the way up to adulthood, and we respond to the needs within that classroom. I guess a lot of what I'm going to talk about briefly is anecdotally. One of our briefings was to talk about the kind of incidents that we're kind of seeing. So it's all anecdotal. It's based on our own recent experiences, although we have our 2020 research as well to back it up, but it's about how it's changed since then. In my opinion, children's knowledge and experience of racism is changing. The death of George Floyd, since the death of George Floyd, children have seemed to be far more aware of racism and aware of, I think, structural racism from a much younger age than we've seen before. But also, and I'm not sure what the reasoning behind this is, it could be lockdown, it could be anything. There seems to be a lot of fear and anxiety among children. It's something we're working on actually in a project with Dr. Susan Davis and Dr. Rhiannon Passmore at Cardiff Met, looking at supporting children with who are shy and anxious. But what we're tending to find is that there are a lot of incidents that seem to be linked back to fear and concerns. And I looked through our racist incident database, and that word fear kept coming up. I was working in a school before Christmas, and one of the children told me that he hated Egyptian people. And there was another child in the classroom who was Egyptian and of Egyptian heritage. And this child had additional learning needs. And when I was talking to him, it transpired that he'd seen a program about mummies online, and it was that fear, and he'd associated that and linked that to a whole group of people. But sometimes children don't have the space and the time to share these ideas and explore these ideas. And I know Daniel said at the start about the space for teachers to fit all this stuff in. But I think if we know that our teachers are trained and our teachers are confident, they can make time for these conversations, whether they're kind of in those little spaces in between. So that fear for me really, really stood out. And we're seeing a lot. I know we've mentioned gaming and things like that. And the incidents tend to come in waves and follow news cycles. So at the moment, we're seeing a lot more incidents based around skin colour. Previously, there's been a lot of anti-Muslim prejudice. That seems to be reported less to us at the moment. And I don't know whether that's to do with teacher perception or child perception of those incidents, but that seems to be changing. So for us, it's really important that we're setting up space for children. So setting up a space that they feel safe to talk and have time to share. And that's what our workshops do, is give the children that space to have those conversations and time to talk. We listen a lot of the time, and they figure that out for themselves. We also focus more on the why now. So thinking about where things like using the science of where our skin colors come from, how have religions developed over time, and where have these value judgment comes from? Who's made those decisions? Do they make sense? And I think teaching children to think critically is one of the key parts of what we do. Previously, we focused a lot more on direct racism, but now we're moving away from that and looking at attitudes, behaviours and experiences that feed into them. I'm going to pass you over to Maria now.
Thanks so much, Kate. I can definitely resonate with those examples that you shared. So we know that to be an anti-racist school, it's about being proactive rather than reactive to examples of racism. And so we're increasingly being asked for more support in terms of identifying, defining, and responding to microaggressions. So a microaggression, as many of you will know, it can be described as a subtle, a small act. It can be an action that reinforces often marginalized or children from a minority background feeling like they are other, like they are the other, like they don't fit in, like they shouldn't belong in a particular group. So what I would just love is if anyone could share in the chat any examples of microaggressions that they've come across at school, and also importantly, how you have responded to them. That would be great to see. In terms of the examples that we've come across, some of them include Black children, ethnic minority children's hair being touched without any permission being given for that, as if they are objects, ridiculing their name, their food and their culture being ridiculed, sometimes their contributions being ignored, and also associating peers with that narrow parts of their culture being represented in the curriculum. So for example, what I mean is associating a Black child with the transatlantic slave trade, associating a Jewish child with the Holocaust, those very narrow snaps of history that might be represented in the curriculum. And so the impact of that we're seeing is that they are feeling like an outsider, like they don't belong. It impacts on their well-being. They don't want to contribute. In fact, they may stop contributing in class. And also what we're seeing is affinity bias. So in and out groups being formed as well amongst the young people, but also sometimes with the teaching population to particular children who, without realizing, based on your own biases, you may have micro affirmations. So favorable behavior to particular children. You know, we need to be honest about that. We need to be honest about the impacts of that as well. So in terms of what can we do? What do we talk about in our sessions? As has been mentioned, decolonizing the curriculum is a central part of this, because what it does is a colonized curriculum leads to a lack of respect for particular cultures from global majority communities. There isn't an appreciation of the contribution that they've made, which can feed into these microaggressions and behaviors. Also for us as educators to role model this behavior. So for us to be aware of what these microaggressions are, to keep upskilling ourselves, to call it out. So I've heard examples of some educators not being aware of what a microaggression is, the impact of it, and laughing along. So calling it out, role modeling accountability, and also creating an environment of psychological safety as much as we can as educators, so that young people and students feel comfortable themselves to say, actually, that's not on. I'm not going to accept that. And why do you think that's acceptable?
Thanks, Maria. There's been some comments in the chat. So May has said, child goes through entire primary school without having their name pronounced correctly, despite correcting people. And Ola says, in a media lesson, a student had asserted that newspapers should tell us the religion of a terrorist. I turned it into a discussion about why the student thought that info would benefit the reader, etc. And these are just countless examples. You know, we could go on and on and on. Things about children's food being weird, I hear a lot. Again, people laughing at other children's names. And they're becoming more and more astute. We found more and more than an appetite from both teachers and students to learn more about these subtle examples of racism, as well as the structural examples that Kate's mentioned. Fantastic. I'm going to jump on now for us to think about, we get a lot of requests, as you probably understand, for education for young people, as we do for teachers. And one thing that I find is that you'll deliver sessions for students and for young people, and you'll offer sessions for teachers, but they're not seen as important for sessions for young people. So Daniel, I'm going to come to you and kind of ask you, why should we have sessions training for teachers and students, and what is it that you think is particularly important that we have in that training for teachers for it to be as impactful and kind of effective as possible?
So, I mean, all those things that Maria talks about self-esteem of young people, the impact of racism. I mean, this is why we have to have anti-racist classrooms. I mean, racism is a pandemic in itself. The health inequalities that arise out of the experience of racism are well documented and are grotesque. I mean, it is damaging for your health to live you've got poorer health outcomes if you've grown up experiencing racism and your experience of education, how you can interact with society when you grow up can often be hindered. So, the need to create anti-racist classrooms imperative, and we can only do that with having anti-racist teachers. Teacher training, to be honest, has been something that's been really under attack from the government over the past decade. So there's been a real desire to move teacher training away from the universities, from PGCEs and long courses, and there's lots of now teaching direct, teach first, on the class, apprenticeship type training of educators. So often, actually, I was very lucky. I had an excellent PGC at Newcastle University, where there was a lot of anti-racist training, but a lot of new teachers, NQTs, actually don't have any of that at all. So they're not as, there's an issue about how well equipped teachers are to deal with these sorts of issues as well. So it's really imperative that there is consistent CPD, working with organisations like Show Racism Red Card, and constant reflection around that. The most important thing for educators and for children to come away with, and I did hear it mentioned, I think it was by you, Molly, is that need to be able to critically engage, critically think, and I mean that would be central to part of any sort of training. I think that's the most important thing that young people come away with. And if you think critically, you can. I don't believe that you can. I think critical thinking is the antidote to racism. To be honest, that has to be central to it. But I'm quite positive actually. We saw the upsurge of Black Lives Matter after the murder of George Floyd. Went out, and I was like Shaka, actually I was watching the penalties hoping that there wasn't a black person miss, but we saw many people absolutely stand together, oppose the racism that those football players experience. So there is an anti-racist majority. Teachers, I believe, want to learn, want to develop, because they want to create those environments for their classroom. But the central thing to that sort of training has to be critical thinking, and how do we deal around difficult subjects like race and racism with young people, because it's something that we all can learn.
Thanks, Daniel. And I think you and now Patrick in the chat have articulated the most common requests, I guess, that we get from teachers, which is that there is this apprehension about getting things wrong. People are nervous. They want to know how to respond to something in a way that it results in an outcome where someone might learn, but someone also understands the consequence of their actions. But that also, importantly, any kind of target is safeguarded, supported as much as possible. And it's interesting you say that you think there's a kind of positive movement. We've just started a course with the NEU in the Northwest, and it's the most subscribed course that the NEU in the Northwest has ever had. So we're also feeling that, I think, particularly in the Northwest, and I'm sure in other parts of the charity. Simon, I'm going to come to you so you can start to talk about the course that the e-learning course that we're offering.
Yeah, thanks very much, Molly. It's quite a good time to come in as well, because you were talking, I know Daniel was talking about critical thinking and Joseph on chat, and also about confidence of teachers. And I think at this point, it's really useful to just talk about a resource that is available to all the teachers out there, and is the online training course. It's about sort of between 4 and 6 hours long. So it's quite meaty. And whenever people ask me about it, I always warn them actually that this is a challenging course for your teachers to go through. You know, it's not a checkbox course. It's not something that people will just take to get through and say, oh, listen, we've got a sort of anti-racism plaque in this school, or our teachers have done this, and you know, they can sort of celebrate that. It's really something that tries to get to the nitty-gritty and the base of what causes racism, and empowers teachers to be able to not only react to racist incidents and actually know what a racist incident is, but also to actually understand what's behind that, so that they can teach and educate young people about the issues. It's something that I think Shaka said a little bit, or was it Daniel actually said right at the start, and he said it's not just a case of teachers saying no to pupils. And I used to work for Show Race and Red Card, and I know Stuart Williams is in the session tonight. I worked quite closely with him on some of the training stuff years ago. But what I used to say to teachers when I was delivering sessions is, you know, it's not enough to say no. You've got to give people reasons. You've got to go into it. You've got to, you know, critically think about the reasons why you shouldn't say certain words, or you shouldn't behave in a certain way. You've got to empower the young people around you as well. And that's something I think that's, you know, super important that the course does. Looks at all sort of the Equality Act, you know, what you should do for the inspectorate. Fair enough, you know, need to know all that. But actually, the key element of it is that it's sort of a non-judgmental, it's a non-preachy course that, you know, will hopefully give teachers that level of confidence when talking to young people about racism. And obviously the key thing that comes out of it is that element of confidence, because I was a former teacher myself. I was a primary school teacher in Swansea, and as a Cardiff City fan, that was always fun. But it was a good time being a teacher. I always loved working with young people. But you know, every teacher I worked with was desperate to make the world a better place, and that's why you go into teaching in the first place. All teachers want to make the world a better place. They want to be proactive on equality issues and many other issues as well. So it's giving them the tools to be able to kind of do that as much as anything else. And the other thing it kind of does really is, I think it gives it's a safe environment on the course to try out how you react to certain scenarios, you know. So you can go in there, there's a list of scenarios, you can try them out, you can interact with each other, you know. I think it's a really, really useful course. And I've got some stats here, but whenever I give stats, I always think, well, I'm not going to give any bad stats, so I'm not exactly sure the outcomes of giving these. You know, it's like when you give quotes, you never give, well, it was an average course. Not great. You always give a good one. But just to say that over 80% of teachers, and this is nearly 8,000 teachers that have done this in the last 18 months, said it was excellent. But the key stat, 96 would recommend, that's all lovely, but the key stat is over 90% felt more confident after the course that they could deal with a racist incident. And then 87% felt more confident to actually provide a anti-racism lesson. And I'm just going to jump in on one thing before I pass back to you, Molly. We work with Show Race and eCoaches. We provide online learning. We work with Show Race and the Red Card quite a lot. We this week launched our Tackling Racism in Sport course alongside Show Race and the Red Card. And I think I can't remember who said it, who was talking about it now. Maria, I think, was talking about stereotypes and microaggressions, and that's a major part of that course. Because what we don't want to do with any of our courses is just say to people, oh, now you're not racist. So they won't, you know, they're not going to say racist terms, or they won't act in a racist way. We want to enable people to be an ally and to be proactively anti-racist and to challenge incidents when they happen. And that's a major thing with our sports course. We want people in the terraces to feel confident to be able to stand up in a safe environment and challenge the microaggressions and the stereotypes when they happen. And for example, as a stereotype, we look at all the different stereotypes in our sports course, and the first one we look at is that Black people can't swim, you know, and we try and break down all the stereotypes on a biological, scientific level. So it's showing that it's completely irrelevant. You know, there's no scientific or biological evidence around that. It all comes from segregation in America. You know, that's the basis for a lot of these stereotypes, of all these historical acts of racism that have happened years and years ago. And the result of it now is that obviously sports have missed out on, you know, a huge amount of potential gold medals via black swimmers. But also, one of the leading causes of death in America for children under 4 is drowning. And that's because stereotypes like that are perpetuated, continuously, so that even the communities that they are about believe them. And so it's about saying to people, well, stereotypes are not harmless, microaggressions are not harmless. They all lead up to these incredibly negative and terrible things. So yeah, it's a bit, a lot of critical thinking going on that side of it as well. But yeah, it's a great course, and I would say that I'm very biased as I wrote it with the guys at Show Race and Red Card. But it is really worth catching out. We'll be sending links out to all the different courses, and if anyone from any of the unions fancies getting on board, we'd love to try and get it out to as many teachers as possible, because really I believe it can make a huge difference to teachers out there. But thank you, Molly. It's a really good session, and I'll pass back to those people who can speak with far more authority than I can.
Thanks, Simon. Daniel, I saw that you had a hand up. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment about confidence. And, I mean, the real tragedy is to allow a lack of confidence mean that, you don't engage in sort of anti-racist training or take steps to develop anti-racism. The way I look at anti-racism is like a learning journey, which you never sort of end, and we should be creating environments in school where they're safe to make mistakes and get things wrong, and to learn and to develop and to gain understanding. I mean, for example, at the moment, actually, I'm really wanting to push things through education around Gypsy, Roma and traveller inclusion in education. I think it's the last sort of acceptable racism, really. And, I'm working with some Gypsy, Roma, traveller organisations in doing that. And I am learning so much. I view myself as a real committed anti-racist who, has spent a long time, fighting the good fight. But, the more you work with people, the more you learn, and it's a never-ending journey. So be confident, really, because the tragedy is to do nothing.
Thanks, and I'm seeing some really kind of inspiring quotes and messages and statements in the chat as well as kind of like advice. So this is really, really good to see. Kate, please can you come in, but also inform us kind of any additional resources that are available, including downloadable PDFs, support, advice, all that stuff.
I definitely will. I just wanted to add that one of the things perhaps we haven't mentioned is our teaching population. And when we're looking at our teachers as well in Wales, and I think probably across the UK, although I don't know the stats for the whole of the UK, the majority of teachers are white. There are less than 2% of teachers in Wales who are from Black or Asian or minority ethnic backgrounds. That doesn't tally with the proportion of people in the UK. So, and we know that teachers within this space from Black, or Asian or ethnic minority backgrounds are often more likely to leave the profession. So it's not just about what we're doing in terms of supporting children in school, it's what we're doing to support our colleagues, support other staff, and to make it an inclusive environment for the teaching profession as well, because actually the power of role models, children having teachers that look like them, is huge. It's massive and it can't be underestimated. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. I think in terms of resources, Simon's going to share a PowerPoint for us just to show some images of some bits.
This is my first opportunity, Kate, to ruin the session. So give me 2 seconds there. Okay. I'll just put that on there. Is that okay? Can you see that?
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. So I was just going to point you in the direction of our publications on the Red Card website. So this is where we add any new publications, any new research. Currently, some of the research on there are the annual reviews, but also we've done exclusion reports, we've done investigations into racism in Wales, where we surveyed teachers and surveyed pupils as well. And I know that Scotland have done a similar thing recently. So potentially, sorry, Jed, or you may know if that may be upcoming. And I know we're looking to do more research here as well. So in terms of research, that's there. On the next slide, on slide 2, we've also got a resources and activities section on the website that includes our education packs, but also includes fact sheets that I think are one of the most asked for things from when we're talking to teachers. Terminology is something that seems to be a huge concern. So it explains the roots and the origins of words and how you would explain the why to children. So there's those, but there's also things around having conversations with children, having conversations with parents and guardians, because that can be quite anxiety inducing for teachers when they're talking about racism and anti-racism. It's when it's that different situation at home compared to what's being taught in school. So there's lots of fact sheets around that. And that's where any new resources will be uploaded. So check it out. And then I'm going to pass over to Maria to talk about the rest.
Thanks so much, Kate. So we've just got some examples here of resources that can be used within your schools and within your classroom. So the top 2 there on the right are 2 relatively new, well, the one on the left is hot off the press. It was just published last week. The one on the right was produced last year. And I would say the one on the left is for Key Stage 3, and the What is Racism, probably Key Stage 1, 2. Then this book is Anti-Racist, is a great practical book that you might want to use in secondary schools. It's American focused, but still really relevant to the UK experience. And it's got lots of activities in there that if you have any anti-racism action groups within your schools, led by both educators and young people, that's a good one to get you started. And then there's also David.
Seminar.
Hello, Edeline. I think you might be off mute. And then David Olusoga has got a range of books, including for young people as well. So it's a really accessible introduction to British history, which includes the Black experience. So often we present features in British history as just Black history, but as we know, this needs to be presented as a representative British history. And then on the right hand side there, so building on what Daniel said about this being ongoing learning and building our confidence, I would say that these are books that we all need to have in our own bookshelves. So Reni Eddo-Lodge is one that a lot of you will be familiar with. Kehinde Andrews is a great book in terms of that context in which our curriculum operates. And Nice Racism. Now, not a lot of people know that Robin DiAngelo is actually, her PhD is in multicultural education. So she comes from an education background. And so that's why her books are so relevant for us as educators. And then the last one there, Wish We Knew What to Say, is directly talking about guidance on how we talk to children about race. And then on the 4th slide, just bigging up the NEU's wonderful anti-racist charter. And so just some examples here of the reflection questions that they have in the charter that are just really useful reference points for us as we embed anti-racism into a whole school approach, not just learning aspect.
Well, I shall stop sharing. Can I just jump in and say The Clapback by Elijah Lawal is a fantastic book. It's got Your Guide to Calling Out Racist Stereotypes for Teachers, because I used it on a lot of the stuff that we've created, and it goes to sort of the history of where stereotypes come from that exist within classrooms, and how you can have conversations then about that. So, all right.
Fab, thank you so much. I'm so excited to read our new one for Key Stage 3. It looks fantastic, and also I've just written all of those down, so thank you, Maria. We're now going to come to the kind of Q&A part of the event, and I know a few have been typing away in the chat, and I've got one question to get us. I've got 2 questions to get us going. If you have any more that you thought of, please do type them in the chat, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. So I'll start with this first one. which is, what can universities and academics do to support teachers in this? How can sport and football play a key role in this engagement too? Would anyone like to respond to that question from the panel? Asif, go on.
Well, I'll answer the questions about universities first. And I suppose the first universities that pop into my mind are the ones which do initial teacher education. I suppose one place they could start with is by trying to attract more teachers from BAME backgrounds into the profession in the first place. We have to be a more representative profession, and I think Kate was talking about the statistics in Wales. We have similar statistics in Scotland, and recently there's been a report in 2018 which set a target of increasing to 4% the representation by 2030, and that in itself is a very ambitious target for Scotland. It means recruiting a lot more teachers from BAME backgrounds, and essentially, even more importantly, retaining the ones that we have as well. The second thing that teacher training colleges can do is to do more work with trainee teachers on anti-racism, on how to challenge racism when they see it in the classroom, on how to have and to lead those difficult conversations, those sometimes tense conversations that can be scary and can be threatening, but nevertheless need to take place. And I think there are probably people on the panel that are better qualified to talk about the role of football than I am. So I'll pass over to them.
Shaka, I feel like that question is crying out for your input. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, certainly. Before I start addressing that, I posted a link in the chat earlier in response to something that Maria brought up about YouTubers or gamers using the N-word. I heard Ta-Nehisi Coates, an author I'd love to read and hear speak, kind of address that closed group communication, and I posted a link to Ta-Nehisi's response about that for anybody who wants to scroll a little way back. As far as listen, I've always felt that football kind of is a fair reflection of our society, and while a lot have been, especially over the last year, have been pointing out that racism is a society problem, not just a football problem. I've always felt that football was perfectly positioned to address so many of these societal issues, because it's a microcosm of who we are, and players command such a presence, if not authority. And as I mentioned before, by the nature of the game, I think it represents the best of who we can be. And for those of you who've heard me speak before, I'm sure you've heard me say, where else can, using my own experience in a Newcastle United dressing room, you have players from all four corners of the earth. We go out onto the field on a Saturday. We work to win a game. When we win, we celebrate together. When we lose, we go out on the training ground Monday to put it right. I think that represents our calling as members of a society, of members of a country, of members of this world, as well as we can ever put it. And that for me is where football plays its greatest role in understanding who we are and how we're at our best, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of in footballing terms, position or ability. That we work together to put this right. That for me is where we have to continue to use the game and the athletes within the game to lean into the broader aspects of anti-racism.
Thanks, Shaka. I knew you'd be pretty well placed to answer that one. Kate.
Sorry, Molly, I was just going to jump in very quickly and say, I'll be like a broken record. My answer just to every question is, they could do the online course. But no, they could, seriously. We've had quite a few ITT universities go do the online course if they're not near a Show Race and Red Card office. Maybe your wonderful education workers can't get there, because obviously the course allows them then to explore the issues in a safe environment, and then they can have the conversations then within their classrooms and their webinar, their workrooms as well, so they can start sort of chatting about different elements of inequality and racism. But it also then looks at the inspectorate quite deeply and the curriculum, and pulls out good practice of what you can do to bring equality and anti-racism into your curriculum, and how you can keep Ofsted, Estyn, and I've forgotten the Scottish one, so I'm so sorry. All of the, and the Northern Irish one, so all of those guys happy as well. But yeah, I mean, that's just to say that is definitely an option that a lot of ITT providers have used.
Molly, we've had a question on university. Stuart Williams, could you maybe come in on the work that you've been doing with the NEU and show us some red card? Because I think it's one of the groundbreaking bits of work that we've done over. It was 2008 when we first developed it, Stuart.
Thanks, Jed. No, it was a lot before then. It was with Simon, actually. Mr. Richards.
It was our program, wasn't it?
It was. I think the initial one was just a little conference where guest speakers were speaking to trainees in Trinity St David's in Carmarthen, and then Simon and I got together and he developed, sorry, with a little bit of assistance from me. I'm not taking any credit here. Different courses to go in, and it's been going on, I would say, since about 2004. So you're looking at about 8 years, I would say it's been going on. And now Show Racism Red Card Wales goes into all 6 ITT universities in Wales every single year to deliver to all the trainee teachers. So they must have delivered to a few thousand trainees by now. Sessions such as terminology, immigration, how to deal with difficult issues, conversations, resources to use in the classroom, which are given then to the trainees to adapt and change at how they like. But for me, it's one of the proudest things I've done or I've been involved with in my time working for the NEU is the relationship we've got with Show Racism Red Card in Wales, especially. And I've been going to a lot of these conferences over the last 8 years and can see the difference that it makes to their confidence. So long may it continue as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's all about the buffet really for you, Stu, isn't it? To be fair.
I can certainly speak to that. Thank you, Stuart. We're just actually about to do something similar in the Northwest. So it's great that it's been happening for a long time before the Northwest has been about. Kate, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, actually, I love that program as well. It's something that I do a lot of work on at the moment. And what's exciting about it is it runs. We offer a day of training for the students, but it runs far longer than that now, because we've seen things like Bangor University last year. The students actually set up their own anti-racism group so that they could stay in touch throughout the year and share examples of good practice that they were doing within their own classrooms and get ideas from each other. So the fact that they can take it and run with it in different directions is fantastic. But the reason I had my hand up was I was just going to come back to the question about what universities can do. And I know Simon said about being a broken record. The two things that I think kind of we need to keep doing is communicating and self-reflection. So reflecting on the universities themselves. What are your contracts like? Who's got the permanent contracts? Because that's something that seems to come up a lot when you talk to staff and teaching staff around who gets the permanent contracts, who doesn't. So actually looking at the makeup first and then going from there. But also communication. So much good work is being done on anti-racism, but often it's being done in silo. And we don't necessarily share that with each other and communicate that with each other. And I know there's loads of amazing research and loads of amazing projects that we can all link together and support on. So the more that we can bring each other in with that. We've recently become a member of the BAME Ed network in Wales, but it's a national organisation. Name is currently in development and looking like it's going to be changed, but that's a really inspiring group of lots of organisations coming together and looking at how we can fit as a jigsaw to create this anti-racism net, if you like, across the whole of the country. So work together, share and communicate as well.
Thanks, Kate. And Maria's just put a really good point in the chat as well around looking at the leadership section of the NEU Anti-Racism Charter, and also potential to hold focus groups, anonymous survey to get additional data on what students and teachers feeling are on EDI at the school or I guess university.
Sorry, Molly, that was in relation to a question in the chat, but ironically, it also was quite relevant to what Kate said. We're also joined up.
I know. Sumity, you have put a question in the chat, but I will come to you. So sorry, you've been patiently waiting.
I'm a bit concerned. Show Racism is all about education, and all the years I've been involved with it, I'm really proud of what all our educators have done. However, on a much wider angle, how do you think we can ensure that this doesn't become just flavour of the month in the way that other issues have done over the past, such as, for instance, the murder of Stephen Lawrence? How do you think that we can keep it in the public psyche so it becomes part and parcel of daily life as opposed to something specific that people need to deal with?
Any of our panelists want to take that one?
Shall I take that one?
Okay.
Go ahead.
So in a school setting, the way to make anti-racism a part of everyday life, as well as getting, you know, fantastic training in from Show Racism Red Card, I think is, you know, I can see some head teachers there, and you're welcome to join our union, but I think it's also having an active union group of teachers collaborating around issues within school, you know, using the anti-racist charter as a collective so that teachers and educators in school take ownership of their environment. I think that's how you keep anti-racism in a school setting. Public-wide is much more difficult, isn't it? But I do feel like George Floyd was a turning point in society, and that there is a vast anti-racist movement that is continuing to grow. So we just have to build on that.
Asif, do you want to come in on that one as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. How do we make sure it's done consistently instead of just being the flavour of the month? There's two words in answer to that question: resource and support. That's how you make sure that it's done consistently. We know that teachers want to play their bit. Teachers are perhaps uniquely placed to tackle the blight of racism in society, and they want to. Social justice is a really cornerstone value in our profession. If I look at the General Teaching Council for Scotland standard for registration as a teacher, the bar that every teacher in Scotland has to reach to become and qualify as a teacher and stay a teacher, social justice is a key component of that. It's spelled out in black and white. Teachers do want to do their bit, but they need support. I can't stress that enough. They need support in terms of professional learning. I need support in terms of good quality materials that they can use and adapt in school. So for me, that's really important. If you want good quality anti-racist education, which is what we all want, then that absolutely needs to be resourced and supported properly. And we need to be pushing local and national government to make sure that happens.
Thank you. I'm seeing a hand raised there from Maria. I'm going to go to one of the questions that was put in the chat a bit earlier, and then if we have time, I will come to the hands. But we'll see how we get on. So something that Patrick actually already responded to in the chat, but I think it's one that a lot of teachers I speak to really struggle with, and I'll read it out, which is: any tips on how I, as a parent governor with responsibility to equality, diversity and inclusion, a responsibility I requested, can encourage the school to make anti-racism a priority? And this is from the perspective of a governor, but I think this is something that teachers also can struggle with. Does anyone want to come in on that one? No.
I think Patrick's already responded to it, and I have as well. Some others may have in the chat, but just to reiterate, so Patrick's point was about equalities data. So evaluating equalities data and presenting that to the governing body, the SMT, to paint a picture of where particular gaps are and how you respond. And then I just built on that with another example of perhaps qualitative data, so having some focus groups to get a sense of what the student population, teacher population's perspective is on EDI, anti-racism in the school, and presenting it that, as well as the chart of the leadership section, looking at that as well. So yeah, but excellent question.
Thanks, Maria. Okay. Graham, do you have a question you want to ask? You want to come in?
Yeah, my question would have been about how the school community responds. I actually think that it's not just the job of the teachers to teach this. I really think it's really important that you engage parents, particularly parents whose kids have exhibited racist language or behavior in school. They need to be engaged and sometimes confronted with this. I often find the case that teachers mean well, but they're asked to do a lot without a lot of support or backup. And there are procedures in place. In Scotland, we've got pretty good ones in place for reporting incidents, for recording them, so we know how many incidents there are in school. But there's not a great consistency about how we challenge that stuff. So Asif is quite right that there's a need to back that up with resources and time. But I actually think that my question really will be about what resources and materials do we give to parents and other members of the school community to back up what the teachers are learning. And if I may say a little bit as well, I'm actually a councillor in Glasgow, and I just about a month ago became the vice convener for the Education Committee. That's a bit of a poison chalice, but I only have 2 meetings to go, so I won't be there for that long. But in the time that I am there, though, I'm quite keen that what we are able to do on curriculum is discussed quite avidly with the new Director of Education we've got. We've had certainly a good commitment since Black Lives Matter, especially from particularly Glasgow and Edinburgh councils, but other councils, to properly integrate the lessons of that experience in slavery legacy committees, in consultations with the public. We're actively looking at statues and street names now. Interesting struggle over a plaque in Edinburgh, which came to a conclusion successfully, thanks to Sir Jeff Palmer. So there's been real progress around having the discussion. What seems to happen, though, is that there's been a real slowness of the educational authorities and the establishment to reflect that in the curriculum. There's a massive public yearning to discuss this issue, and definitely, like the impression I've had from my involvement in it, there's definitely a willingness from the public. We need to just consolidate that in the way we deliver the curriculum. And we, as I say, we don't have a centrally directed one. We shouldn't. I want teachers to have the discretion to do that, but we need to give them the backup in order to do it.
Thanks, Graham. Did you have a specific question for the panel?
I think I did ask it. I did say that I wondered what they thought about teaching parents and the wider school community, and how we're going to link what we're teaching teachers to what we're teaching the school community, because we have to look at what is an anti-racism approach for the whole school community.
Fab, thanks, Graham. Kate, your hand went straight up there. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just interested because in one of our local authority areas, we're funded to work with the schools, do teach training, do governors training and parents training. In the past, when we've tried to do parents training, turnout's been really low. It tends to be the parents that attend are the parents who probably are least in need of the training. They're the ones who want to show their support. They want to be positive around it. So, but I think actually utilising those parents and giving them the space to talk and discuss and have input and influence is really valuable. So it's thinking about how we can engage parents in perhaps a slightly different way. So previously we've talked about using actually using the children to present back to their parents themselves, tying it into things like parents' evenings. But often in a lot of schools, even getting some parents to attend parents' evening can be be quite difficult. So it's thinking about how we can access them in a way that's easy for them to access. We're putting on training sessions, but that might not be the best way to do it. It may be things that are virtual, things that are online. It may be things that are sent home with the children. But utilising the parents that want to be involved to support you in that, I would say it's really valuable.
Thanks, Kate. I'm going to add one more question into the mix, and I'm going to ask for one person to answer it, which is a question from Anita, which came in earlier, which is, what are the ways we in England can push for anti-racist education to be part of a national curriculum? Daniel, I feel like you might be best placed to answer this. Maria, maybe, I'm not sure, but please come in. We've got a few minutes left.
So, I mean, supporting demands for a different curriculum, the Black curriculum. I think the Carla's doing something similar. There's lots of calls. I'm always a believer that change only really comes from the bottom up. We are not going to get government, I don't think, really gift us the curriculum that we believe that children are entitled to as a human right, and that will be that will help develop them into rounded human beings. So make those changes. We can all be the change, and if we're all doing that and we're encouraging other peoples to do that, we will change the education system for the better. I fundamentally believe. We have to raise the demands as a collective, but we can also make those changes in school ourselves and as a school, and encourage other schools to do the same. So much of this, though, is rooted in so much of the problem is rooted in an education system that has got a ruthless accountability regime, high stakes testing, and just doesn't allow the space. So we have to also fight for, a completely different education system in which teachers are well trained, well qualified, critical thinkers, consistent anti-racists. But fundamentally that change will only really come from the bottom up through collective organisation, but also those changes that we can personally make.
Fab, thank you so much. We've unfortunately come to the end of the session. I know we've still got 2 hands up, so if you can quickly type in the chat any questions, and we can see if we can perhaps get back to you. I've just made a commitment to that, so please take it. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. Thank you to our guest speakers. Thank you to all of you for giving up a portion of your Wednesday evening. A reminder that we'll be sending a feedback form to your email that you signed up to the link with. So please do fill it in so we can kind of change and adapt any future events to be kind of successful as possible. And you'll also be receiving some of the resources that Kate and Maria have mentioned via email, as well as some of the links.
I'll share the recording as well, so you can share it with colleagues if you want. And I'll link you up to the online course too, because obviously it's amazing. That's a great way to finish.
Yeah, let's end on that. Thanks, Simon. That's the end. Please do get back to your busy lives, and I'm sure we'll see you on another online session again in the future.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.